The red and blue lights flared in the rearview mirror like a sudden accusation, slicing through a rare stretch of civilian peace that General Liam Hayes had claimed for himself on a humid North Carolina evening. He had commanded hundreds of thousands of troops, steered operations through 3 continents, and sat in rooms where presidents waited for his assessment. None of those stars mattered now. He wasn't wearing them. On this quiet 2-lane stretch of Highway 87 outside Oak Haven, he was simply a black man in a beautiful car. What followed would end one man's career, shake an entire police department to its foundations, and force a small southern town to confront the difference between a badge and true authority. The Carolina air hung thick and sticky in late August, clinging to the asphalt and the high branches of the loblolly pines. For General Liam Hayes, the heat was only a minor inconvenience compared with the almost spiritual quiet of the open road. He drove a midnight blue 1968 Chevrolet Chevelle, a machine he had spent 5 careful years restoring in the few hours the Army allowed him. The deep baritone of the V8 was a welcome contrast to the usual soundtrack of helicopter rotors, classified briefings, and the endless machinery of the Pentagon. At 58, Hayes carried the quiet gravity of a man who had survived ambushes in Fallujah, navigated the political minefields of Washington, and collected a chest full of medals he almost never wore. Tonight he wore none of them. A plain gray polo, tailored khakis, and the soft leather of the Chevelle's bench seat were all the uniform he needed. He was 45 minutes from Fort Liberty, where a private dinner with the base commander, Colonel David Mitchell, waited. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend before a NATO summit in Europe. He had even dismissed his security detail, craving the solitude only an empty highway and a classic car could give. 2 miles back, tucked behind a rotting billboard for a long-dead motel, sat Oak Haven Police Cruiser number 4. Inside, Officer Bradley Jenkins chewed peppermint gum with aggressive boredom. 26 years old, built like a linebacker who never made the team, Jenkins carried a permanent chip on his shoulder. He had barely scraped through the academy and already owned a thick file of civilian complaints. Excessive force, racial profiling, the usual small-town pattern. In Oak Haven, the police chief was a family friend, so consequences never quite reached him. Jenkins believed he was a wolf among sheep, a hard man held back by soft modern rules. He wanted a big bust, something that would prove his worth and earn him a detective's badge. When the pristine Chevelle rolled past at exactly 55 in a 55 zone, his eyes narrowed. Impeccable paint, custom wheels, and behind the light tint, a black man in his late 50s driving a car worth more than most houses in the county. In Jenkins's mind, the math was instant and baseless, stolen or drug money. He never ran the plate. He didn't need to. The decision had already been made. Hayes noticed the headlights closing fast long before the siren. A lifetime of assessing threats put him on alert the moment the cruiser's posture turned aggressive. He checked the speedometer, dead on 55, both taillights working, tags current. Then the light bar exploded in a strobe of red and blue, and the metallic chirp of the siren cut through the pines. He exhaled once, slow and measured. He had been a black man in America long before he became a general, and he knew the choreography by heart. No panic, no sudden moves. Right turn signal. Gradual deceleration. Smooth pull onto the wide gravel shoulder until every tire was clear of the travel lane. Park. Engine off. Silence settled, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal and the deliberate crunch of boots on gravel. Hayes reached up, switched on the dome light so the entire interior was illuminated, and placed both large calloused hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel, spine straight, eyes forward, waiting. The footsteps slowed, grew heavier, designed to intimidate. From the corner of his eye, Hayes watched Jenkins slap a heavy palm against the trunk, an old fingerprint trick executed with unnecessary force. Then the officer was at the driver's window, tactical flashlight already blazing, even though the sun had barely set and the dome light was on. The beam stabbed straight into Hayes's eyes. "Roll it down." No greeting. No, sir. Right hand resting casually on the butt of the holstered sidearm. Hayes squinted against the glare but did not turn his head. With slow, telegraphed movements, he lowered his left hand to the manual crank and rolled the window down. "Good evening, officer." The voice was a deep, resonant baritone that had once filled briefing rooms across the globe. Perfectly calm, empty of fear or challenge. Jenkins leaned in, nose wrinkling as if something smelled foul. "Where'd you steal the ride, old man?" Hayes's jaw tightened a fraction. Heart rate stayed steady. He had been insulted by warlords and threatened by men who actually meant it. The petty racism of a small-town cop was only a localized irritant. The danger, however, was real. "This is my vehicle, officer. I can provide the registration and title. What is the reason for the stop?" "I ask the questions here, boy." The slur hung in the humid air, toxic and heavy. "Keep your hands clamped on that wheel. You move an inch without my say-so, and we're going to have a serious problem, understand?" "I understand. I'm simply asking why I was pulled over." "Swerving, failure to maintain lane, reckless driving. Take your pick." Jenkins lied without hesitation, sweeping the flashlight across the immaculate interior. Nothing out of place. No alcohol, no paraphernalia. Just the pristine leather of a carefully restored classic. The emptiness frustrated him. "License, registration, and proof of insurance. Now." "My registration and insurance are in the glove compartment," Hayes said patiently. "My identification is in my wallet, which is in the breast pocket of my jacket on the passenger seat. I will need to reach for them." Jenkins drew the weapon half an inch from the holster. The metallic click was sharp and deliberate. "I told you to keep your hands on the wheel. You reach for anything, and I will put a hole in you. You hear me?" The contradiction was classic and lethal. "Give me your ID, but if you move to get it, I'll shoot." Hayes recognized the psychological trap immediately. Jenkins wasn't conducting a traffic stop. He was hunting for a reason to escalate. He wanted panic, argument, a sudden movement that would justify force. Hayes gave him none of it. He kept his eyes locked straight ahead, voice a pillar of ice. "Officer, you have instructed me to keep my hands on the wheel, and you have instructed me to retrieve my documents. I cannot do both. I am unarmed. I am a general in the United States Army. If you would prefer to retrieve the jacket yourself, I invite you to do so safely." Jenkins barked a harsh laugh. "A general? Yeah, and I'm the King of England. Step out of the vehicle." "Officer, I advise—" "I said step the hell out of the car!" Jenkins roared, temper flaring. He unholstered fully, muzzle pointed at the doorframe, finger too close to the trigger guard. "With your hands raised. Do it now." Hayes knew further assertion of rank was useless. The man in front of him was blind to reason, drunk on power and bigotry. Slowly, methodically, he unbuckled the seatbelt with his left hand while keeping the right on the wheel. He pushed the heavy door open and stepped out onto the gravel. 6'2", he towered over Jenkins by 2 inches. Hands rose to shoulder height, fingers spread. The sheer physical presence, tall, unafraid, completely controlled, seemed to enrage Jenkins further. The officer lunged. Before Hayes could process the movement, Jenkins seized his left wrist and twisted it violently behind his back. Pain flared sharp and white through an old shoulder injury from a hard landing in Kandahar. "Stop resisting!" Jenkins screamed, though Hayes had not moved a muscle in opposition. A brutal shove slammed the general face first onto the hot metal hood of the Chevelle. The impact drove the air from his lungs. Polished steel bit into his cheek. Residual engine heat seared against his skin. Jenkins drove a forearm into the back of Hayes's neck, pinning him with entirely unnecessary force. Hayes closed his eyes and drew one slow, controlled breath. He did not struggle. He did not curse. His mind retreated to cold, tactical calculation. Badge number, unit designation on the cruiser, exact time. The humiliating pain of metal and crushing weight registered, but his spirit remained unreachable. Let him hang himself, Hayes thought, jaw clenched against the hood. Let him dig the grave so deep he can never climb out. The handcuffs ratcheted shut with cruel, unnecessary force. Cold steel bit deep into his wrists. Jenkins yanked him upright by the arms, sending another jolt through the injured shoulder. "Thought you were untouchable in your fancy little car, didn't you?" Hayes stood tall, refusing to hunch. He looked down at the younger officer with a gaze so piercing and empty of submission that Jenkins briefly broke eye contact. "You have made a catastrophic mistake, officer." It was not a threat. It was a simple statement of fact. "Shut your mouth." Jenkins shoved him toward the rear of the cruiser, opened the cage door, and forced him inside. The door slammed with final weight. Inside, the air smelled of stale sweat, institutional cleaner, and the accumulated despair of 1,000 previous occupants. Hayes sat rigidly upright, bound hands pressed awkwardly against the small of his back. Through the plexiglass, he watched Jenkins strut back to the Chevelle. No warrant, no probable cause. That did not stop the illegal search. Glove box torn open. Registration and maintenance logs tossed onto the floorboards. The neatly folded jacket yanked from the passenger seat and rifled. Jenkins pulled out a slim black leather wallet, flipped it open under the flashlight, and extracted the primary identification. A Department of Defense Common Access card, microchip, complex holographic overlay. Crisp photograph of Liam Hayes in dress blues, 4 stars gleaming on each shoulder. Rank clearly printed, 010, General. For a split second, doubt flickered across Jenkins's face. Arrogance smothered it. He laughed aloud, a cruel sound in the quiet evening, and walked back to the cruiser, tapping the heavy plastic against the glass. A 4-star general? Seriously? 010? Where'd you get this printed, old man? You could have at least made yourself a colonel. A 4-star is just insulting my intelligence. Hayes said nothing. He simply held the stare. Jenkins threw the wallet into the front seat, climbed behind the wheel, and threw the cruiser into drive. "We're going downtown, fake general. We're going to run your prints, find out what your real name is, and lock you up for forgery, resisting arrest, and whatever else I can think of on the way." The Chevelle disappeared into the growing dark, abandoned on the shoulder. 30 miles away, at Fort Liberty, Colonel David Mitchell paced the length of his secured office. The grandfather clock in the corner read 1945. General Hayes had been due at 19 Fras. In the military, on time meant 15 minutes early. Hayes's punctuality was legendary. 45 minutes late without a call was not an inconvenience. It was an anomaly that set off every alarm in Mitchell's head. He hit the intercom. "Captain Lewis, get in here." His aide stepped in moments later, sharp in immaculate fatigues. "General Hayes is 45 minutes late," Mitchell said, voice clipped. He dismissed his protective detail to drive himself. "Ping the GPS tracker on his vehicle. Now. Don't alert the detail yet. I don't want panic if it's just a flat tire." Lewis pulled up the classified tracking program on her secure tablet. 4-star generals did not drive completely off-grid. A silent, encrypted transponder lived in the Chevelle's undercarriage. Her brow furrowed. "Sir, I have the signal. Vehicle is stationary on the shoulder of Highway 87. Been parked there 20 minutes. Mitchell's blood cooled. "Is he with the vehicle?" "Checking his personal comms unit." She waited for the return ping from the encrypted smartwatch Hayes always wore. Her eyes widened. "Sir, the vehicle is on 87, but the general's beacon is moving fast, traveling away from the car, currently heading into the town limits of Oak Haven." Mitchell stared. "Ambulance?" "No, sir. Speed and route match a vehicle heading directly toward the Oak Haven Municipal Police Department." A sudden, terrifying cocktail of confusion and rage rose in Mitchell's chest. Local police. Why would local police have a four-star general in a moving vehicle away from his car? "Get Major Higgins on the line," he ordered, voice dropping into the deadly calm of a commander entering a combat zone. Higgins was the provost marshal, head of military police, on base. "Tell him to gear up a rapid response team. 4 vehicles, full tactical. We are paying the Oak Haven Police Department a visit." The Oak Haven cruiser pulled into the back lot of the precinct, a drab, brutalist concrete building washed in the sickly yellow of sodium vapor lights. Jenkins hauled Hayes out and shoved him toward the heavy steel rear doors. Shoulders aching, wrists bleeding slightly from the tight steel, throat dry, Hayes still walked with perfect measured cadence into the glaring fluorescent lights of the booking room. The precinct was quiet. A few officers typed at desks, drinking stale coffee. Behind the raised booking desk sat Sergeant William Davies, 20 years on the job, deep bags under his eyes, graying mustache. Before the badge, he had spent 10 years in the Army, 2 deployments to the Middle East. Tired, meticulous, completely free of the reckless arrogance that infected younger cops like Jenkins. "Look what the cat dragged in," Jenkins announced, chest puffed, shoving Hayes forward. The general stumbled once, caught his balance, and stood tall before the desk. "Got a live one, Sarge. Suspicious vehicle, resisting arrest, and fraud. Check this out." He tossed the wallet onto the high desk. It slid across the wood and stopped in front of Davies. "Says his name is Liam Hayes. Thinks he's a 4-star general. Tried to pass off a fake military ID. Pretty good counterfeit, I'll give him that. But he picked the wrong rank to fake." Davies sighed, rubbing tired eyes. He didn't look at Hayes yet. He picked up the ID card. The moment his thumb brushed the plastic, his entire body froze. He knew exactly what a Department of Defense Common Access card felt like. The precise weight, the subtle texture of the embedded microchip, the exact dimensions. He tilted it under the harsh fluorescent light. The holographic Eagle and Department of Defense seal shimmered perfectly, flawlessly transitioning colors. Typography exact, not a fake. The most real piece of identification in the entire building. Davies's heart began to hammer. He read the name, Hayes, Liam. Rank, 010, General. Slowly, almost robotically, he lifted his eyes from the card and looked at the man standing in handcuffs in front of his desk. Impeccable posture, squared shoulders, calm, piercing, utterly fearless eyes that were currently staring a hole through his soul. Then Davies recognized the face. Armed Forces Network, base newsletters, portraits in the Pentagon when he was a young corporal. The blood vanished from Sergeant Davies's face. The room seemed to spin. Cold sweat broke across the back of his neck. "Jenkins," he whispered, voice trembling so violently he could barely form the word. "Yeah, Sarge. What do you want to charge him with first?" Davies stood, hands shaking, eyes locked on the ID. "Jenkins, what have you done?" He moved with sudden jerky urgency that startled every other officer in the bullpen. Snatching the heavy ring of precinct keys from his belt, he bolted out from behind the desk and shoved Jenkins aside. "Hey, watch it!" Davies ignored him. He stopped 2 feet in front of Hayes, chest heaving. Muscle memory from his Army days violently hijacked his nervous system. Spine snapped straight, heels clicked, right hand rose in a crisp textbook salute. "General Hayes, sir. Sergeant William Davies, formerly of the 101st Airborne. Sir, I am so profoundly sorry." The bullpen went dead, silent. Phone stopped ringing. Fingers froze over keyboards. 5 pairs of eyes stared in bewildered shock at the veteran sergeant, saluting the handcuffed black man in the center of the room. Hayes did not smile. He did not boast. He simply nodded a fraction of an inch. "At ease, Sergeant. And please remove these restraints. They are aggravating an old aviation injury." "Immediately, sir." Davies's hands trembled violently as he stepped behind the general and fumbled the key into the cuffs. Jenkins, finally sensing the ground shift, stepped forward, face flushing dark red with confusion and defensive rage. "Davies, what the hell are you doing? You don't uncuff a suspect without my authorization. That's my collar. He's a fraud." Davies spun, unlocked cuffs dangling from his fist. Eyes wide, bloodshot, filled with a fury that mirrored his terror. "Shut your mouth, Jenkins. You ignorant, arrogant fool. Look at the card, the microchip, the holographics, the DOD seal. It's real. Do you understand who this is? You just assaulted and falsely imprisoned the commanding officer of United States Army Forces Command." Jenkins blinked, the words bouncing off thick skull. "No, no way. He's driving a stolen muscle car. He got aggressive." Hayes calmly brought his arms forward, rubbing raw, bleeding wrists. He adjusted the gray polo and squared his shoulders. When he spoke, his voice cut through the stagnant air like a precision-guided munition. "Officer Jenkins, at exactly 1842, you initiated a traffic stop without probable cause. You explicitly threatened lethal force when I offered compliance. You physically assaulted me, conducted an illegal search of my vehicle, and transported me across county lines without stating a valid charge. You have operated under the assumption that your badge shields you from accountability." He took one slow step forward, towering over the younger cop. "You are sorely mistaken." Before Jenkins could form another response, the heavy wooden door to the captain's office swung open. Chief Robert Miller, heavily built, political connections having kept him in power for 2 decades, stepped out holding a half-empty mug of coffee. "What in God's name is all this yelling about? We have civilians in the waiting area." "Chief," Davies said, voice cracking, "we have a catastrophic situation. Officer Jenkins just brought in—" The sentence was never finished. It started as a low rumble, a vibration that shook the cheap drop-ceiling tiles. Coffee in Miller's mug began to ripple. Outside the frosted glass of the front doors, the darkness of the evening was suddenly obliterated by a blinding barrage of strobe lights. Not police red and blue, but the stark white and amber of tactical military vehicles. 4 matte black up-armored SUVs skidded to a synchronized halt, completely blocking the street, the sidewalks, and the precinct exits. Armored doors slammed open with unmistakable force. "What the hell is going on out there?" Miller demanded, dropping his mug. It shattered on the linoleum. No one looked down. Jenkins instinctively reached for his sidearm. Hayes's voice cracked like a whip. "Do not touch your weapon, officer, unless you wish to make the last and worst mistake of your very short life." The front double doors did not merely open. They were violently breached. 2 massive men in full tactical gear shoved them wide. Olive drab fatigues, heavy plate carriers, Kevlar helmets. Across their chests in stark white lettering, "Military Police." They fanned out instantly, hands resting securely on the grips of lowered M4 carbines. They did not aim at the local police, but their tactical positioning was flawless. The room was secured in less than 3 seconds. Behind them strode Colonel David Mitchell and Major Higgins. Mitchell looked ready to burn the building to its foundations. Jaw clenched so tightly, a muscle ticked in his cheek. Combat uniform, silver eagle gleaming. Eyes swept the room with predatory speed, bypassing the bewildered local cops, ignoring the terrified Sergeant Davies, and locking instantly onto Hayes. He saw the raw red indentations on the general's wrists, the smear of dirt and grease on Hayes's cheek from where his face had been slammed into the hood of the Chevelle. Mitchell's face went completely devoid of emotion, the hallmark of a highly trained ranger about to unleash absolute hell. "General Hayes, sir." Colonel Mitchell snapped a razor-sharp salute, followed immediately by Major Higgins and the tactical MPs. "Stand down, David," Hayes replied calmly, returning the salute with a wince as the injured shoulder flared. Chief Miller finally found his voice, face flushed with indignation. Now hold on just a damn minute. You are in municipal jurisdiction. You cannot storm into a civilian police department with armed soldiers. I am Chief Miller, and I demand to know." "Shut up," Major Higgins barked. The provost marshal stepped forward, sheer physical mass dwarfing the police chief. "By order of the United States Department of Defense, we are securing a high-value asset and investigating the kidnapping and assault of a flag officer. Jurisdiction just got elevated way above your pay grade, Chief." "Kidnapping?" Miller sputtered, eyes darting frantically between the MPs and his own officers. He looked at Jenkins. "Jenkins, what did you do?" Jenkins was visibly shaking now. The unassailable bubble of his localized power had been violently pierced by the terrifying reality of federal military authority. He was driving a suspected stolen vehicle. He resisted. He had a fake ID. Colonel Mitchell walked slowly across the room until he stood inches from Jenkins. The local officer instinctively leaned back, intimidated by the aura of the combat veteran. "You detained a 4-star general," Mitchell said, voice a lethal, vibrating whisper. "You put handcuffs on the man who answers directly to the Secretary of Defense, and from the bruising on his wrists and the contusions on his face, you used physical force." "He was reaching for something," Jenkins lied. A desperate, pathetic attempt to use the standard excuse that had saved him from internal affairs complaints in the past. He reached into his jacket. "I feared for my life." Hayes let out a soft, dry chuckle. It was a terrifying sound in the tense room. "Major Higgins," he said, turning to the provost marshal. "Did you secure my vehicle?" "Yes, sir. A secondary team is with your Chevelle right now. They found your wallet tossed on the floorboard, and the car had been illegally searched." "Excellent." Hayes turned his attention back to Chief Miller, who looked like he was on the verge of a myocardial infarction. "Chief Miller, I drive a 1968 Chevrolet Chevelle. It is a vintage vehicle. However, because of my security clearance and my rank, the Pentagon retrofitted my personal vehicle with a state-of-the-art 360-degree encrypted audio-visual recording system. It continuously uploads to a secure server at Fort Liberty." Jenkins's jaw dropped. All the blood drained from his face, leaving his skin the color of wet ash. Hayes continued, voice echoing with devastating finality. "Furthermore, my smartwatch, issued by the Defense Information Systems Agency, actively records audio telemetry when my heart rate spikes above a certain threshold. Every word your officer said, every racial slur he used, every threat of lethal force he manufactured is currently sitting on a server in Colonel Mitchell's office." Chief Miller closed his eyes, swaying slightly. He knew exactly what this meant. Not just a lawsuit. The end of his department. A federal civil rights investigation. The FBI, the Department of Justice, and the national media descending on his town like a biblical plague. "General, sir," Miller pleaded, arrogance completely evaporating. "Please, this is a catastrophic misunderstanding. Officer Jenkins he's a rogue element. We will fire him immediately. We will drop all charges. We can handle this internally." "Internally?" Colonel Mitchell stepped in, voice rising. "Your officer assaulted a federal official. That is a felony under 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 111. He deprived him of his civil rights under color of law, a violation of paragraph 242. You aren't handling anything internally, Chief. The FBI's regional field office has already been notified. They are en route." The bullpen of the Oak Haven Police Department felt like a tomb. The air was heavy with the suffocating weight of irrevocable consequences. Jenkins, the man who had styled himself a wolf among sheep, trembled so violently his duty belt rattled. The illusion of supreme authority had shattered, replaced by the crushing reality of federal prison. "Sarge," Jenkins whispered, turning a desperate, pleading gaze toward Sergeant Davies. "Sarge, you got to help me. Explain." Davies stepped back, disgust contorting his weary features. "You dug this grave yourself, Bradley. I told you 100 times your badge wasn't a license to terrorize people. Now you're going to pay for it." Hayes stepped forward. The physical pain of his injuries faded into the background as the commanding aura of his rank took full precedence. He looked at Jenkins not with rage, but with a profound, clinical pity. "Power," he began, baritone voice commanding absolute silence from every person in the room, "is a heavy burden. It requires discipline, restraint, and an unwavering commitment to the truth. You, Officer Jenkins, wear a badge that represents the trust of your community. You used it as a weapon against someone you deemed lesser. You thought I had no voice because you judged me entirely by the color of my skin and your own preconceived biases." He gestured toward Colonel Mitchell and the heavily armed military police standing like statues around the perimeter. "I am fortunate," Hayes continued. "I have the backing of the United States military. I have resources, I have cameras. But what about the young men who don't? What about the citizens you've pulled over on dark highways who didn't have stars on their shoulders or encrypted servers backing them up? How many lives have you ruined because there was no one to stop you?" Jenkins could not meet the general's eyes. He stared at the scuffed linoleum floor, a single tear of pure panic cutting a path through the sweat on his cheek. Chief Miller frantically wiped his brow with a handkerchief. "General Hayes, I swear to you, I didn't know he was operating like this. I will strip him of his badge right this second. Hand over your weapon and your shield, Jenkins, now." "Do not touch him, Chief," Major Higgins ordered, stepping between Miller and Jenkins. "He is now a subject of a federal investigation. We will hold him securely until the FBI agents arrive to take him into federal custody. He doesn't belong to your department anymore." Higgins nodded to two of his military police officers. They moved forward with terrifying efficiency. Before Jenkins could even process the command, his duty weapon was stripped from his holster and a pair of heavy military-grade zip ties was ratcheted securely around his wrists. The sound of the thick plastic zipping shut was the exact inverse of the metallic click Jenkins had used on Hayes less than an hour earlier. It was the sound of justice recalibrating. "Colonel Mitchell," Hayes said, turning away from the pathetic sight of the arrested officer. "Sir, I believe we had a dinner reservation. I am profoundly late." "The chef kept it warm for you, General," Mitchell said, a fierce, satisfied pride evident in his eyes. Hayes paused at the shattered glass of the front doors and looked back at Sergeant Davies. Davies snapped to attention once more. "Sergeant, you are a credit to your former uniform. When this department is inevitably restructured by the Department of Justice, I hope you remain to guide the next generation of officers. They will desperately need someone who understands the true meaning of duty." "Thank you, sir," Davies said, voice thick with emotion. Hayes walked out of the Oak Haven Police Department, the heavy tactical doors held open for him by two armed sentries. He stepped into the humid Carolina night, the blinding white strobe lights of the military convoy casting long shadows against the concrete walls. He climbed into the back of Colonel Mitchell's armored SUV, leaving the broken remnants of a corrupt precinct behind him. The drive to Fort Liberty was quiet, the silence a stark contrast to the chaos of the precinct. Hayes looked out the tinted window, watching the pine trees blur past. He had fought battles across the globe, commanding armies to secure freedom in distant lands. But tonight was a sobering reminder that some of the most critical battles for justice, dignity, and the soul of the nation were still being fought right here at home, on the dark, lonely stretches of American highways. The departure of General Liam Hayes and the military police convoy did not restore silence to the Oak Haven Police Department. Instead, it left behind a suffocating, terrifying vacuum, quickly filled by the looming dread of federal intervention. Chief Robert Miller retreated to his office, locked the door, and frantically dialed his personal lawyer, his political fixers, anyone he thought could save him. None of them answered. News of a military intervention at a local precinct had already leaked to the regional dispatchers. The rats were fleeing the sinking ship. At exactly 21:15, the second wave arrived. No flashing lights this time, no blaring sirens, just the ominous synchronized hum of 3 black Chevrolet Suburbans pulling into the precinct lot. Doors opened, and a dozen men and women in navy blue windbreakers with bright yellow FBI lettering stepped out into the humid night. Leading them was Special Agent John Reynolds, tall, gaunt, silver hair, eyes like chipped flint. A veteran of the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, Reynolds had built his career dismantling corrupt police departments, prosecuting hate crimes, and putting dirty cops in federal penitentiaries. He did not suffer fools, and he had zero patience for small-town tyrants. Reynolds walked straight through the shattered front doors, his tactical team fanning out behind him with boxes, hard drives, and federal warrants. Sergeant William Davies stood at attention, waiting. "Agent Reynolds," Davies said, voice steady despite the chaos. "The suspect, Bradley Jenkins, is secured in Interrogation Room A. The military police left him in zip ties per your request." "Thank you, Sergeant. I need you to gather every officer in the building and have them surrender their duty weapons and badges to my team. This precinct is now an active federal crime scene." Chief Miller burst out of his office, face a mottled, unhealthy purple. "Now see here, you cannot just walk in here and declare my department a crime scene. I am the chief of police. I have rights, and my men have—" "Robert Miller," Agent Reynolds interrupted, voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet register. He did not use the title chief. He pulled a thick folded piece of paper from his jacket and thrust it against Miller's chest. "This is a federal search and seizure warrant signed by a United States District Judge. It covers every computer, every filing cabinet, every dash cam, and every body cam in this building. It also covers your personal phone and your private email accounts." Miller looked at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that Officer Jenkins did not act in a vacuum," Reynolds stated, stepping closer, forcing Miller to backpedal. "When the Pentagon uploaded General Hayes's vehicle footage to our servers an hour ago, my cyber division didn't just watch the assault. They ran Jenkins's badge number through the national database. We found 34 buried excessive force complaints, 12 dismissed civil rights lawsuits, and a digital paper trail of you, Robert Miller, personally making sure none of them ever saw a judge." Miller's knees buckled slightly. He grasped the doorframe of his office to keep from collapsing. "We are not just here for the assault on a 4-star general," Reynolds continued, signaling his agents to begin bagging the precinct's computer towers. "We are here for the systemic deprivation of rights under color of law. You protected a predator because he was your friend's son and because you thought the people he targeted were invisible. You picked the wrong night and you picked the wrong man." Down the hall, inside the stark gray walls of Interrogation Room A, Bradley Jenkins sat shivering. The air conditioning was cranked high, but he was sweating profusely. The heavy military zip ties dug into his wrists. The bravado, the racial slurs, the aggressive posturing, all of it had evaporated, replaced by the sickening realization of his own utter insignificance. The door opened. Agent Reynolds walked in carrying a laptop. He did not introduce himself. He did not offer water. He simply sat down across the metal table, opened the laptop, and turned the screen to face Jenkins. "I want you to watch this, Bradley." He hit play. The screen showed crystal clear 4K resolution footage from the hidden cameras on Liam's Chevelle. It captured the pristine driving, the sudden aggressive pullover. The audio was flawless. Jenkins's voice filled the small room, dripping with condescension and racist vitriol. "Where'd you steal the ride, old man?" "I asked the questions here, boy." Then came the physical assault, the violent twisting of the general's arm, the sickening thud as Hayes's face was smashed against the hot steel hood. Jenkins could not watch. He closed his eyes and turned his head away, a pathetic whimper escaping his throat. "Look at it," Reynolds commanded, voice cracking like a whip. Jenkins flinched and opened his eyes. That man has 2 Purple Hearts. He commands armies. And you treated him like garbage because of his skin color. You are being charged with federal kidnapping, aggravated assault, and civil rights violations. You're looking at 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Your chief is going down. Your department is being disbanded. And your life as a free man ended the second you put your hands on that car. Reynolds closed the laptop with a sharp snap that made Jenkins jump. The DOJ does not offer plea deals for cases with 4K video evidence. Get comfortable, Bradley. You're going to be in a cage for a very long time. 6 months later, the winter air in Raleigh, North Carolina, was crisp and biting. Inside the polished mahogany walls of the United States Federal Courthouse, the atmosphere was even colder. The gallery was packed to absolute capacity. National news anchors, civil rights leaders, and military personnel filled the benches. The story of the highway general had become a national sensation, sparking massive protests and a congressional inquiry into small-town police corruption. At the defense table sat Bradley Jenkins, no longer a rugged enforcer, pale, gaunt, shapeless bright orange federal jumpsuit, hair closely cropped, eyes darting nervously around the room. Beside him sat a public defender. The police union had abandoned him the moment the federal indictments dropped. Across the room, sitting entirely alone at the prosecutor's table by special permission of the court, was General Liam Hayes. He was not wearing a gray polo today. Today he wore his Army service uniform. Deep blue fabric, perfectly tailored. 4 silver stars on each epaulette catching the light of the brass chandeliers. The left breast of his jacket a vibrant tapestry of ribbons, commendations, and medals, a visual testament to a lifetime of service, sacrifice, and unbreakable discipline. He looked like an ancient king sitting in judgment. Judge Thomas Harding, a stern federal jurist with decades on the bench, looked down over his reading glasses. "Officer Jenkins," Judge Harding began, voice echoing off the high ceilings. "A jury of your peers took less than 2 hours to find you guilty on all counts. Before I pass sentence, the victim has requested to read a statement. General Hayes, the floor is yours." Hayes stood. He did not rush. He buttoned his jacket with his left hand, right shoulder still bearing the subtle stiffness of the assault. He walked to the wooden podium in the center of the courtroom. The room was so silent, the soft rustle of reporters' notepads could be heard. He adjusted the microphone and looked directly at Jenkins. Jenkins could not meet his gaze, staring fixedly at his shackled hands. "I have spent nearly 4 decades defending the Constitution of the United States." Hayes's deep, resonant voice filled the room, carrying the weight of command and the sorrow of profound experience. "I have sent men and women into combat. I have written letters to grieving mothers. I have done this because I believe in the fundamental promise of this nation, that all people are created equal and all are entitled to the equal protection of the law. When I was pulled over on Highway 87, I was not a general. I was not a soldier. To Mr. Jenkins, I was a stereotype. I was a target. The uniform I wear today protected me in the aftermath, but it did not protect me on the side of that road. And that is the tragedy that brings us here today." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy over the courtroom. "I do not stand here fueled by vengeance," Hayes continued, voice softening just a fraction, projecting a devastating kind of pity. "Mr. Jenkins is a symptom of a deeper sickness, a sickness where authority is wielded without accountability, where a badge is used as a shield for bigotry rather than a beacon of safety. I survived that night because of who I am, but I speak today for the thousands of men and women who look like me, who did not have stars on their shoulders, who did not have encrypted cameras, and who did not survive their encounters with men like Bradley Jenkins." Hayes looked up at Judge Harding. "Your Honor, true justice is not just the punishment of the guilty. It is the dismantling of the systems that allowed the guilty to thrive. I ask the court to sentence this man to the maximum penalty under the law, not just as a consequence of his actions, but as a warning to every corrupt officer in this country who believes they operate in the dark." He stepped back, offered a crisp, flawless salute to the judge, and returned to his seat. Judge Harding let out a long breath, clearly moved by the commanding presence of the general. He turned his attention back to the defense table. "Bradley Jenkins," Judge Harding said, voice hardening into steel, "you took an oath to protect and serve. You perverted that oath to terrorize and dominate. You have brought disgrace upon yourself, your department, and the noble profession of law enforcement. For the charge of deprivation of civil rights under color of law, I sentence you to 120 months in federal prison. For the charge of aggravated assault, I sentence you to an additional 60 months to be served consecutively. You are remanded immediately to the custody of the United States Marshals." The gavel slammed down with the finality of a gunshot. Jenkins broke down, sobbing uncontrollably as the heavy steel chains were wrapped around his waist by the marshals. He was hauled out the side door, his cries echoing down the long, empty marble hallway until they faded into nothing. The aftermath of Oak Haven was absolute. Chief Robert Miller was indicted 3 weeks later on federal racketeering and corruption charges, ultimately pleading guilty to avoid a trial. The Oak Haven Police Department was temporarily disbanded and placed under federal receivership. When the department was finally reconstituted a year later, it looked entirely different. The new interim chief of police was William Davies. He stripped the toxic culture down to the studs, implementing rigorous bias training, community outreach programs, and zero-tolerance policies for excessive force. He hung a framed copy of the United States Constitution in the booking room, right where Liam Hayes had once stood in handcuffs. As for Liam, his life returned to the grueling, high-stakes world of the Pentagon. He deployed to Europe, oversaw global strategies, and continued to wear the weight of his stars with unmatched dignity. But a few months after the trial, on a warm spring evening, he found himself back in North Carolina, off-duty, simple white linen shirt and dark jeans. He walked out to the driveway of his private residence and ran his hand along the pristine midnight blue paint of his 1968 Chevrolet Chevelle. He slid into the driver's seat. The leather was familiar and comforting. He turned the key and the massive V8 engine roared to life, a deep mechanical heartbeat. He put the car in gear and pulled out onto the open highway. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows through the loblolly pines. He rolled the windows down, letting the warm Carolina breeze rush through the cabin. He drove exactly the speed limit, not out of fear, but out of a profound, hard-won peace. The road was his again. And this time, he knew that the shadows lurking behind the billboards were just a little bit brighter.